Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Graham Watkins, and I am the recently appointed Division Chief in the IDB Climate Change Division, and I'm really super happy to moderate this event, which is on Can the Blue Economy Spark a Sustainable and Inclusive Recovery in the Caribbean? I'm particularly happy that this is, in fact, I think my first official webinar as Division Chief, and we get to talk about the Caribbean, since I was actually born in Guyana, believe it or not, and grew up in Trinidad. So talking about my homeland. We really hope that we're going to have a super exciting and interesting and fruitful discussion with the panel of very distinguished high-level decision makers from the Caribbean. We'd also like you guys to participate, the audience, and so please feel free to post any of your questions or comments for the panel in the chat box, and we'll hopefully get to that at the end of the discussions. Clearly, the COVID-19 pandemic has arrived and had huge impacts on everyone's lives, from individuals, families, businesses, towns, and obviously nations have been very adversely affected and perhaps changed forever by the pandemic. At the IDB, we're particularly committed, more committed than ever really, to support making people's lives better, and more specifically really support both the rescue phase and the sustainable recovery phase after the pandemic. And it's very likely that the kinds of actions that we take today, the economic recovery actions in particular, are going to shape the future of the region for years to come, not decades to come, which means that we really need to think about what we want to do today in terms of what's going to happen in the future. And we really need to try and build more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable economies. This is true across all of Latin America and the Caribbean, but it's particularly true in the Caribbean. The blue economy concept, the approach, is something that has been around for a little bit of time. And so that's why we want to try and focus on that, to discuss that today and really look at how taking a blue economy approach can really affect how we think about economic recovery and make our economic recovery more effective in the long run. The blue economy approach is really rooted in the idea that we need to focus in on the sustainable use of oceans, hence the blue, but also on things like increasing inclusion, increasing sustainability. It's really about how do you integrate different ideas and integrate the island sides into the marine sides as well, and look at new innovative concepts, marine biotechnology, different kinds of renewable energy, sustainable tourism that's based off the ocean, and sustainable fisheries, obviously, which is obviously has a very long history. And perhaps it can help Caribbean countries with this new sort of thinking, this new way of looking at the Caribbean to shift to much more sustainable paradigms in the long term. Measuring a region's economy is not an easy thing to do. And it's kind of hard when you've got to think about the island and the ocean resources as well. But the World Bank actually did estimate that the Caribbean ocean resources generated about 400 billion in 2012. And that's about, obviously numbers are very variable, but somewhere between 14 and 27% of the global ocean economy. But the Caribbean only represents about 1% of the global ocean area. So it's a hard hitter in that sense. And it's obviously an area that is terribly important already for the Caribbean. And the IDB is particularly keen to move forward this blue economy approach in the Caribbean. We've already have a platform called Sustainable Islands, where we're trying to develop projects. For example, the Blue Carbon Restoration Project in Clarendon, as markers to see how the bank can really move forward this agenda in the Caribbean. And we very recently approved a blue economy policy-based loan for the Bahamas, again, in light of the support that we're trying to move forward. Let me turn now to our expert speakers and hear from them. I'm sure you're more interested in hearing from them than from me, to really hear about how blue economy can be a key driver for sustainable and inclusive recovery in Latin America and the Caribbean. The first part of what we're going to do today is we'll hear from Mr. Cletus Springer, Director of the Department of Sustainable Development at the Organization of American States, but also somebody that has a very, very long history. Well, perhaps I shouldn't say so long of a history in public service across the Caribbean. Thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, the Department for Sustainable Development at the OAS is an advocate of ocean and coastal protection and management. Perhaps we could just start off with you telling us a little bit more about work you've been doing and in ocean and coastal management in the Caribbean. I think you need to put your mic on.
Yes, thanks, Graham, and welcome to your new position. We look forward to working with you very closely in the coming months and years. Let me just say that my history in this area is just as long as you and May Gordon. So I'm glad to have some partnership in that particular area. Well, at the OAS, we see the blue economy as providing the basis for member states to pursue, as you said, a low carbon and a more resource efficient path to economic growth and development that can enhance livelihoods for the poor, create economic opportunities, and reduce poverty. Our work in this area preceded by almost 2 decades the definition of the concept that came up in 2012 at the Rio +20 conference. For some time now, we have been working with our member states to strengthen their capacity in coastal and marine management, including marine biodiversity and marine ecosystems. But over the past 5 years in particular, our work in the area has been defined by our Inter-American Program for Sustainable Development, which was adopted in 2016. And that program identifies 5 areas: energy, water, sustainable cities, biodiversity and ecosystems management, climate change and disaster risk management, and environmental law, policy, and governance. And it's important to note that we approach these 6 areas in an integrated manner, focusing on their cross-cutting characteristics. A year ago, we completed, with financial support from the government of Mexico, a 6-year-long intervention in the Caribbean that we call REFIX. REFIX is an integrated coastal zone management tool that supports the effective management of coastal and marine resources. And using stakeholder analyses and socioeconomic valuation methodologies, we helped our member states to strengthen their capacity to manage marine resources to meet the commitments that they had made in the Caribbean 2020 challenge to increase coverage and effective management of marine protected areas. REFIX builds country capacity in ecosystems, goods, services, valuation methodologies, cost-effective interventions to improve marine ecosystems health, revenue-raising techniques of cost recovery, and user pays polluter principles. And through REFIX, we did the following. We helped to strengthen the management of marine parks in Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada, and the Bahamas. We developed a long-term financing strategy for Barbados' marine protected area. We executed a monitoring and co-management capacity building project in Northeast Tobago. And we helped Haiti to evaluate anthropogenic risk factors to the Caracol Bay ecosystems using habitat risk assessment models. And you can get more details on these activities if you go to our website, www.oas.org/DSD, biodiversity/REFIX. I would say more on these in later interventions. Thank you.
That's great. And I know that area of Haiti very well, actually, having worked there as well. Obviously, even before COVID came along, Caribbean countries have been working very hard to try and create employment and address fiscal challenges directly. But with this unexpected crisis, the challenges are it's going to get more complex. It's going to get more difficult, obviously. How do you think the OAS can support Caribbean countries moving forward in terms of a sustainable recovery pathway, and especially in terms of leveraging those ocean and coastal resources?
Right. Well, Graham, before I dive into this question, I think it's important to re-emphasize. It's something that we know already, but it's something that we cannot emphasize or overemphasize. That when we speak of a blue economy, we're not talking about leveraging ocean and coastal resources in a business as usual culture. we're talking about doing this, that is leveraging coastal and ocean resources in a manner that promotes economic growth, social inclusion, and the preservation of the improvement of livelihoods, while at the same time ensuring environmental sustainability of the oceans and the coastal areas. So basically, we're talking about a decoupling of the economic development of the oceans and the impact or negative impact that will have on the sustainability of these resources. I think it's a well-known point, but it cannot be overemphasized. So to come to the heart of your question now, at the OES, we see opportunities to build on and to scale up the interventions that I mentioned earlier. And of course, we would welcome financial support from the IDB to do that in the context of your Sustainable Islands platform. As an organization that encompasses all of the countries that share the Caribbean Sea, we believe the OES is ideally placed to facilitate sustained high-level political dialogue, to share best practices and lessons learned, and to support capacity building on the blue economy. And I believe our culture in the OES of integrated and inclusive management of natural resources gives us some degree of preeminence in this agenda. The blue economy is an all-encompassing agenda. It straddles many sectors, it has many actors, many stakeholders. But within the Secretariat for Integral Development, in which the Department of Sustainable Development is located, we have, we believe, many of the programming elements of a blue economy approach. And we think that we can bring an integrated approach to advancing the agenda. We have programs, for example, in ports, in MSME development, in science and technology, in tourism, in education, and of course in sustainable development. And we can do this, we think, by linking the science with the decision-making through our regular ministerial meetings, meetings of our General Assembly, and of course our Council for Integral Development. In the first half of next year, we hope to convene in Costa Rica the 4th meeting of ministers and high-level authorities on sustainable development to agree an agenda on decarbonization for sustainable development in the Americas. And the draft concept note for this meeting has a very strong focus on preserving the priceless decarbonizing functions of seas and oceans. We will all be aware, I'm sure, of the very dire predictions of the IPCC in its last special report on the issue of the impact of global temperature rise on coastal and marine resources and the implications for lives and livelihoods. So the outcome of this ministerial meeting next year, in which we're hoping that the IDB will have a very strong presence and participation, we hope that this meeting will give us the blueprint for the OES to have an impactful intervention in helping the Caribbean move its green economy agenda.
Well, thank you so much, and super important, very important point, emphasizing the integration, the connecting of economic growth, inclusion, livelihoods, and environmental sustainability. And those are all absolutely crucial if we're going to ensure a sustainable recovery. So moving forward, the blue economy agenda in the Caribbean, and in fact anywhere, supposes that we can overcome basically the gaps and address gaps and overcome challenges. And a lot of these are related to things like governance, local capacities, technological availability, and the capacity for innovation. What role can the OAS play in working to overcome these challenges and fill some of these gaps? And how, doing that, can we really move forward this blue economy approach and agenda in the Caribbean?
Right. Well, the barriers are long-standing. They are many. They are diverse. But I believe they stem from two key factors. I think we have the absence of a trusted and diversified knowledge base on the blue economy, and the lack of a coordinated approach to developing and utilizing the requisite management and development resources that can inspire and support innovation in the blue economy. And we are making some progress towards addressing these barriers. For example, in Grenada, and I saw my good friend Angus Friday on the participants list, and I'm sure he will share through his questions and perspectives how Grenada is proceeding with this. But we're making progress. At the OECS, we have also some very important actions that are being taken there. But I believe that we need to move more aggressively to address these two key deficiencies. And if we don't address those, then the financial challenge, which is ever present, it will make it more difficult for us to overcome the financial challenge if we do not overcome these other barriers. So what we'd like to see in the OES, and here I can say from a personal perspective, what I would love to see, I think a CARICOM partnership conference on the blue economy with the participation of our heads of government, the private sector, regional agencies, civil society organizations. If we can have such a meeting that can generate agreement on the ability of the blue economy to provide the social and economic benefits that we desperately need in a post-COVID environment, a commitment to urgent adoption of a strategy for restoring, protecting, and maintaining the diversity, productivity, resilience, the core functions, and the intrinsic values of marine ecosystems, I think that will take us a very long way towards addressing the issues. We have such a commitment already at the OECS, as I said, but I think we need to widen that circle of engagement at the wider Caribbean level. I think we need a strategy that is, first of all, inclusive, that is well-informed, that has a precautionary and adaptive approach underpinning it, that is accountable, that is transparent, that is holistic, that is long-term, and as I said, that is innovative and proactive. And assuming, that's a big assumption there, that we can mobilize the funding, I believe the OES can continue to do some of the following. I think we can help our member states to strengthen their investments in building human capital, the human capital that we need to harness the employment and development benefits of the blue economy. I think we can help them to improve valuation of marine resources and ecosystem services. I think we can support the adoption of integrated ocean planning and management, strengthen the human, institutional, technological, and technical capacity, accelerate the implementation of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is a very critical convention, and that has not received, I believe, the attention that it deserves at the policy level and at the technical level. And you may know from your briefings that we are working with the IDB on a project through its regional public goods program to help our member states to come to terms with the multilateral environmental agreement context of sustainable development. And UNAME Gordon and Jamaica is a participating country in that program, along with Costa Rica and Uruguay. So a final point, I think, to this is because I think the blue economy is by nature an inclusive concept. But I think we need to work harder at making that inclusion a lot more practical. We need the active participation of societal groups, especially women, young people, fishers, communities, indigenous people, marginalized and underrepresented groups, and so on. And Canary, I'm pleased to say, has been leading the charge on that element of the inclusiveness in this. And I think if we can give more support to their efforts and the efforts of other groups in the region, I think it will take us a very long way.
Great, thank you so much, Cletus. That's a great overview of the conceptual basis for blue economy and some very good ideas about how to move the agenda forward in the region. Now I'm going to shift to talking to the panel, and the panel today, which is in fact very distinguished, really reflect three different cases across the Caribbean. We're fully aware, obviously, that each country is very different and the challenges and opportunities are very different for recovery and for dealing with blue economy. First of all, I'd really like to welcome Ms. Uname Gordon, who's the Director of the Climate Change Division at Jamaica's Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. I just want to say that having grown up myself in the IDB through different angles, you're a bit of a household name in the Climate Change Division, to be quite honest. And thank you so much for giving us some time today and joining us. And obviously, I mean, one of the reasons you're a household name is that basically Jamaica is really taking the climate change, let's call it a fight, very seriously. The new NDC launched in June really is a great commitment, shows increased ambition and across the priority sectors of the economy. So how do you actually think a blue economy approach would help Jamaica meeting climate goals and supporting also the sustainable recovery?
Thank you very much, Graham. So allow me also to thank Gerard and his team and your predecessor, Amelie, for forcing me into this space. And it's good to be in a space where the elders are speaking. I'll lay down a disclaimer one time that I am no expert on the blue economy. I'm an environmental professional with extensive knowledge in the climate agenda, and therefore we'll stick, in Jamaica we say stick to my lane. But what is clear is that the pandemic has resulted in really major disruptions in critical sectors. And tourism for us, education, agriculture, trade, challenging our food security, livelihoods, and I like to say our lives and the capacity to really conduct business. Our remittances, which is an important part of the Caribbean economic architecture, has fallen, and the IMF has predicted a GDP decline for Jamaica of approximately 5.6%. And this was actually confirmed by the Prime Minister yesterday when he was making an announcement for the upcoming election in the Parliament yesterday. But notwithstanding all of that, we see quite an opportunity now, much more than ever, that we need to pay really special attention to an economic recovery which fosters the building of climate resilience and long-term sustainability. In Jamaica, in submitting the enhanced NDC in the pandemic, people is asking, how do you do it? But it was the result of a lot of planning and orchestration. We thought that it was necessary. And we attached the sense of urgency for increased climate action, and attached to that the mobilization of climate finance to our own climate ambition. This was clearly evident for us since the Prime Minister participated and led the charge and took part in the discussions on climate finance in the 2019 UN Climate Summit, and also was a big part of the high-level panel on the high-level forum on the UNGA. So, but I want to digress to say, let us not forget that we are ocean states. That's what we are. And therefore, coastal tourism is a key driving force within our economies. So, but I like to say that we have to not move away, but focus with more, but move forward with more ambition and the notion that the ocean presents greater opportunities. And I heard Cletus. It is part of the resource pool for economic recovery and for building back better. And we are ocean states. Within the ocean and the blue economy framework, therefore, there are numerous solutions that we see presenting itself. While we recognize that the opportunities also presents a challenge for the biodiversity of the country. But let's start with the employment that it can generate, our food security to make us more food and protein secure, the great opportunity for energy security, and this, as I said, the support for living, and I'm moving away from livelihood to real living in the Caribbean. And all these are necessary determinants for a successful implementation of our NDC. We need to look at the technology development that can drive this and the engagement of our youth. I referring to my colleague Cletus, greater effort therefore must be placed to strengthen the linkage in a very, very sustainable way between ocean-based products and services and what we want to now call the new tourism product that we crave to emerge out of this pandemic. I want to end the answer to this is, let's not forget that in Jamaica, as characterized at this time, 120,000 people, or 75% of the workforce in the tourism industry, is directly affected and is out of work at this time. We need to diversify in a very sustainable way. And this is linked directly to the implementation of the NDC. And we started yesterday, for some of you who was online with us, with the development of our long-term development strategy, which we attach the same level of urgency, charting a 2050 pathway. Thank you, Graham.
Well, congratulations again to Jamaica on being leaders in ambition on the NDC and on doing the long-term strategy. I mean, we're finding that quite a bit of success with doing long-term strategies because it allows you to think much more about what the future is going to bring. And Jamaica is really one of the largest countries in the Caribbean. And you've already basically mentioned that the tourism economy is critical to Jamaica from an employment perspective. And there's no doubt that the COVID pandemic has hit the tourism sector very, very hard. And that it's clear that the government has to prioritize how to boost that economy and get it back on track. Can you perhaps give us some guidance on how you think the ocean resources and the blue economy type approach can cross-link back into creating employment and reshaping perhaps the sector in line of what you were saying about, and what Cletus has said also about being more sustainable in the long term?
I would digress by saying that Jamaica has now the greatest potential to develop its economy, to build back better, following an integrated approach. As I said, we are ocean states, so we talk about the green economy, we talk about the blue economy, but they have to be really, really integrated. And the opportunity, as many will agree, will enable us to unleash the power of the ocean now that we are faced with this economic situation. I think we must cautiously protect our marine ecosystems because that's what we have. The issue of the value chains and moving the economy up the value chains to integrating the value chains must become part of the discussion profile. And the science-based management plans accompanying the necessary framework, regulatory framework, must also accompany this discussion. As I said earlier, that opportunities exist now for a new tourism product to emerge, which is diversified, and it must be transformative and sustainable and resilient. And what we have seen over the time, we talk about sustainable tourism, but each time we have a crisis, a hurricane, the resilience of the tourism sector is questioned, and therefore there is a great opportunity for that. We are, I like to say, we are ocean states that is joined, not separated, but joined by the Caribbean Sea. And so opportunities exist for building out the blue economy with the implementation of regional and national frameworks and legislation to guide this blue growth. And I think we would want to go there because of who we are. And this approach, therefore, will definitely help us to confront the challenges posed by climate change. Ocean acidification, a common good among all the Caribbean states. The illegal and unreported and unregulated fishing right across the Caribbean Sea. And as we say, the limited understanding and appreciation by too many of our citizens of the value, the importance and the potential of the ocean and the sea and their resources. Let me not end by saying that we must confront the plastic pollution in the ocean. And more action is needed on reducing plastic waste, which is inextricably linked to our climate agenda and the ambition that we have in the NDC. More awareness, more public awareness, more education, more technology needs to be involved for us to confront all of these challenges. But notwithstanding that, we see great opportunities, and an ambitious NDC is going to help us to, and the long-term strategy where we define the plan clearly to 2050 will take us there.
Thank you so much. Clearly, the heavy emphasis on the need for integration and much greater integration in the future. The connecting of the value chains also critical. But there are still possibilities of developing a new approach to tourism, a more sustainable, but particularly resilient approach to tourism, particularly given the context of the Caribbean and hurricanes. And this question again of doing it at a regional level, of really trying to move forward the regional agenda, but still needing to communicate nationally and regionally, and also at the end of the day, bring in some funding to be able to drive the agenda forward. And then thanks for dropping that last thing on the plastics issue, which obviously is going to be a key part of this, and the circular economy and the links back to climate there. Thank you so much. So our second guest today is Mr. Kirk Humphrey, who's the Minister of Maritime Affairs and the Blue Economy in Barbados. And clearly Barbados are also leading this agenda and driving forward, particularly climate change and looking at resilience. I'm a particular fan of the roof to reef approach. Thank you, Minister Humphrey, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Barbados has shown great interest in modernizing its regulatory framework, strengthening public policies oriented towards sustainable development and climate resilience, some of this with IDB support. How do you think that we can all work together in the future to shape the deployment of the blue economy approach for the country, for Barbados, especially in the context of the post-COVID recovery?
First of all, thank you for having me. And again, let me also welcome you to your new post, and also offer you an invitation back home to the Caribbean, where we'll be very happy to receive you. Good morning to all of my colleagues who are on the call. It's good to be Caribbean people. Good to see you again, Michael, as well. First of all, let me just say spend a few minutes talking about the Barbados's understanding of the blue economy. When we came into office in 2018, we felt it was very important as part of our build out for Barbados to focus on the blue economy. I became Minister of Maritime Affairs and the blue economy. That, I believe, is a statement of our confidence in the fact that the blue economy is going to be a major driver, a major part of who we are and what we do going forward. When we first started looking at the blue economy, we determined that there were a few areas that we had to focus on. We felt it was important for us to look at marine transportation, and I will speak about that in greater detail, I hope, a little bit later. But in relation to shipping and what we do on the international space, as well as our domestic space, as well as what we do in our port, we focus on food, which will be our second pillar. And I think it's important for us to recognize that Caribbean people we've always had a relationship with the sea. We had a troubling start, a troubling history. We came here via the sea. And I think in some ways we still have to reorient our relationship with the ocean. Our ocean space is 400 in Barbados, 424 times the size of our terrestrial space. And we know very little about what we have. And I think it's important for us to start focusing some energy on what is there and how we're going to go about managing it as well. We also looked at physical development. How do we build out? How do we build as we go forward? We have to build differently along the coast, because the reality is this: no matter how much mitigation we do in the Caribbean, and you began by saying that we're different, we are, but we're all very much the same. And no matter how much we build out, how much mitigation we do, Barbados has many humongous aspirations. We're going to be fossil fuel free by 2030. We're working on it. We've already banned single-use plastics and other polystyrene. We're planting 1 million trees as part of our carbon sequestration. We are doing a lot. But with all of our mitigation effort, we don't need to be able to get involved in some adaptation strategies as well. Because no matter what we do, we're never going to shift the needle far enough to prevent the hurricanes that are coming and getting more intense every year. And I'm sure when Michael speaks about Bahamas, at least I hope he does, he will speak about what he actually went through. It's not going to prevent us from dealing with the ocean acidification. It's not going to prevent us from dealing from the reduction in fish that we're seeing. There are things that are happening that are beyond us. I just came from a primary school graduation where I said to my children, though, it's not so much what happens to you because you can't prevent that. It's just how do you prepare yourself now to deal with it. And in all these things, I must say the IDB has been very helpful as a partner in helping Barbados to prepare for a lot of these things as we go forward. I also think now we need to start focusing on biotechnology, because that is going to be a big part of the future as we go forward as well. And that is why we've been having so many conversations about the BBNJ and how does the Caribbean position itself to benefit when we have these wider conversations on those areas beyond our national jurisdiction and the boundaries beyond national jurisdiction. But for me, the blue economy, before I answer your question specifically, comes down to 2, maybe 3 areas. We've been very clear that we want to be able to produce from the blue economy. We want to be able to become more efficient in the traditional areas like fishing, the traditional areas like shipping, how we manage our markets, those traditional areas that we know and that we're really good at. But we also have now to produce in new areas. For us, for many of us in the Caribbean, for us in Barbados, aquaculture is not new on the world stage, but it's a new area in the Caribbean. In our traditional sectors as well, like we become a lot more efficient in relation to how we do things. But we now have a focus on renewable energy in the Caribbean. We've had a study, the IDB also participated and fine-tuned a lot of the findings, and research and innovation is going to be critical. But we know that the ocean can power all of the region. We in Barbados can produce enough energy to power practically all the region, and we don't produce compared to what Jamaica can produce and what some of the other islands can produce. We can produce enough energy. The initial startup cost is prohibitive. And these are the conversations that we need to have. So yes, we have to produce. The other thing I think is important is about preservation. I make the point all the time that we have to have blue aspirations with a green foundation. In everything we do, we have to be cognizant of the fact that we have to protect our marine space. So yes, we want to have more shipping, but we have to make sure that it's green shipping and that they're using less fossil fuels. You have to have more efficient ports so that we spend less time having transactions in the port that should be done in quicker time, exposing ourselves to less damage. We've already seen that during COVID, a lot of the fish that we thought was dead or was gone has already replenished itself. So we know that a lot of what we're facing is man-made. And so we have to position ourselves. And I think above all that, between preservation and production, I think we also need parity. And for those who are involved in the sector, so that I think it was Cletus who spoke about women and disadvantaged groups and persons with disabilities on the national stage, but on the international arena, I think we also need to have parity. And Caribbean countries, it seems as if we make moves, we start to progress, and then the goalpost shifts all the time. It keeps shifting. We've been seeing it in relation to, you began by saying, Graham, that a lot of us have debt issues. And we did not just stumble upon these debt issues. You know, we've been making efforts to reduce our debt. Barbados has done tremendously well. We were the 3rd most indebted country in the world, and now we are not. We've been taking that issue very seriously. We've been focusing, as we were told to focus on our financial services sector, and we've done so. And now we find many Caribbean countries being blacklisted or grey listed. As if to say blacklisting is not bad enough, but to do so without even conversation. And then when you do that, you take away the resources that we should have to be able to focus on this emerging sector. So these things are very much tied. So my last contribution is that we have to be practical. And in our conversations with the IDB, I think that has been the focus that we've had. We are working now in Barbados to develop a roadmap, a strategic roadmap, and we're working with the IDB to do so. I think in a post-COVID environment, we may have to go, and well, not post-COVID, we're still in COVID. We have to go back and tweak some of the things that we've decided upon because we really have to be practical. The IDB has helped us in so many ways. We've worked with the Coastal Zone Management Unit. The IDB has helped us build out that entire area. And any consultant coming to Barbados always talks about the amount of information that we have in Coastal Zone. A lot of that is due to the relationship that we have between the IDB and Barbados as well. We've been looking at environmental management with the IDB for a very long time. We've also worked on our NDCs with the IDB. There's some things now that we have to go and fine tune, like they're in the original set of NDCs. We didn't look at a lot of focus on marine areas, but we now need to be able to do so. So there are a number of things that we're doing. I just think the relationship that we build has to be one that is based on the realities of Caribbean countries. For example, I also have responsibility. I think it was Uname who spoke of IUU fishing. I mean, that's a big one for us. It's a difficult one for us. We have to look at the subsidies associated with some of these persons who are subsidized to fish in Caribbean waters. We can barely offer our fishermen any subsidies. We also have to be cognizant, as well as we try to build out this space, that we are dealing with sargassum seaweed every single year, and it overwhelms our capacity to be able to respond. Sargassum comes on every single beach along our East Coast and our South Coast, and now, in the last few months, along our West Coast, so that we're dealing with this comprehensive, it's a kind of a ubiquitous nuisance to some, but for us, we now know that we need to be able to use it for production as well, because it's here. And I think we have to have a conversation about how do we use this for productive ends. And then lastly, I think Barbados is working on a debt swap. And we're having a serious conversation now about being able to use some of that debt, because the way we finance the blue economy is going to be very, very important going forward. And we have a lot of plans in all the various islands, but where we fall down is that we do not know how we're going to finance them. And we now need to have innovative financial tools to be able to do so. And a lot of us are having conversations about swap. We're very advanced in that conversation. And hopefully it would free up about $25 million US to be able to do some of these things, manage our marine areas. We'll be then in a position to go for about 30% management of marine areas in the EEZ. We want to do the first in the Caribbean complete marine spatial plan for our EEZ. So they're big aspirations, and I think we can work together as we have done in the past to be able to do so. But research is going to be critical. Having access to the information is going to be critical. Having partners who recognize that the tools that we have must be specific to the Caribbean realities is going to be crucial. And it has to be based in the understanding that we are Caribbean people, as Uname said. And for us in Barbados, for example, during the COVID, when many persons were afraid to deal with COVID, we had our ports open. Cruise ships were allowed to cruise. We were moving people because this is who we are. And anything that we do has to be cognizant of who we are. When only emergency personnel were allowed to be on the street, we allowed our fisher folk to fish. There we consider them to be emergency personnel. This is who we are. And when we have that conversation, I think all these things must be brought into the conversation. Brent.
Great. Thank you, Minister, and thanks for the invitation back to the Caribbean. Clearly, sort of looking at the similarities across the region, and really this effort to be practical and realize the Caribbean realities, as it were, to know those realities. Again, the focus though on adaptation, resilience, biotechnology, renewable energy, the interesting one on shipping, which is really one of the new frontiers in terms of changing it around, rehabilitation, equality, but then also some reality checks on how we're going to finance this, how we're going to get parity in discussions, the debt issues, and the innovative ideas of debt swaps, which have been around for a while, but can we make them and turn them towards a blue economy? Just picking up on a couple of things, also you talked about the NDC and the roadmap, and I know that you're working on the NDC right now. How do you envision bringing in the ocean and marine resources, ecosystems as an element of the increase in countries' ambition in the NDC? How do you see that moving forward in the future?
Yeah, I'm sure that you are aware in our original NDCs, we did not, I mean, this was part of the way we hadn't been focusing on our marine space. We didn't include, unfortunately, the marine space in our original NDCs and what we were going to do with it. And now it is a big part of what we're doing. And it is because we have a ministry focused on it. We have a government that's focused on it. And I think, you know, things happen in their own time. And this issue is now right for Caribbean people. We've now included a roof to reef program. And what does that mean? We're looking at the fact that every hurricane season and across the region, based on the way we built, and if the Prime Minister were here, she would tell you that in the early days after we were impacted by a hurricane, there was this emergence of persons we call storm carpenters. So they would just come around and build roofs, but they weren't really skilled at building roofs. And we've continued that tradition, so that a lot of our roofs aren't meant to withstand Category 3 hurricanes, far less what we're dealing with now in the Caribbean, Category 4, Category 5. We've now been looking at our watershed management as water runs off into the ocean space. What kind of water runs off, and how does that impact on our coral? So a big part of this is also how do we then go about rebuilding some of the coral as well. The Coastal Zone Management Unit, in consultation and conjunction with a lot of our NGOs, are working at rebuilding coral. We've developed four new areas and are working at being able to rebuild coral. Of course, as we know, coral grows very slowly, so this could take a little bit of time. But we've now determined that Barbados must be fossil fuel free by 2030, or at least carbon neutral. But we're hoping to be fossil fuel free. And so in terms of how we've been looking, even very recently we imported some buses, they're all electrical buses. We're now having conversations about the ships in terms of, and our fisher folk are having conversations about using solar panels to be able to fuel them, to be able to drive their energy usage when they are out there. We've just are in the process of putting, but we've done our 2 major markets. They're now completely being covered in solar panels, and we're using that energy to finance the markets as well. So we're being very, very innovative. And I think in our NDCs, we're reflecting that as well. But we also know we have very limited space. And there's a lot of conversation around, you know, getting some solar farms, and Barbados is 166 square miles, you know, and we were considering a practical conversation, because I feel we have to be practical. We have to be persons of practical pursuits, even at the policy level. Even in terms of moving, when we were looking at the wind farms, moving the blades from the port to where they're supposed to go, those things are so huge that even, so when people say y'all need to do these things, for us, there are conversations that need to be had, because these things are so huge. They'll be, for most of the areas, you know, you're affecting people's houses, all the wires, you know, and so we're looking at being able to do that. I really believe that a lot of what we're going to be able to do is going to be driven by the ocean. And so we have to be looking at ocean-based renewable energy as we go forward. And, you know, part of our maritime aspiration obviously will be to help reduce the greenhouse gases. That is why we're now working on new merchant shipping legislation. It is drafted, it is out for consultation, and in, you know, looking at what the International Maritime Organization has said that we should do, we put it into our legislation as well, to ensure that even as we continue to produce, we are in a position to do so, but not compromise our country as well. So as I said, the first NDCs did not focus at all on the maritime space, but not in a definitive manner. And so we're now focusing a lot more significantly on being able to build coral. And I think that's going to be important. How do we help the fishermen now to be retooled, to be able to deal with new fishing techniques? And I think it's also critically important as well that a part of this conversation has to be about the skills that our people have been able to develop that has not been recognized as a consequence of some of the challenges that they're facing. We have fisher folk in Barbados who have been innovative in fishing under the sargassum seaweed. So you're still able to catch fish. The seaweed goes into the propeller. They've adjusted their propellers. There's just a whole set of amazing innovations that have taken place. And so as we build out the coral, we build out the fisher folk, I think as part of our aspirations to reduce greenhouse gases, I think we cannot leave those who've been in the traditional sector in the maritime space behind as well. So those are just some of the things that we're doing. But I had a conversation once early in my time as minister, and it has lasted with me for a long time. And the person said to me, Minister, you cannot protect one ecosystem and negatively affect another ecosystem. And so, you know, no matter what we do, that has got to be our focus. How do we bring balance? And I think we also have to be flexible. I think the IDB has to be flexible. And having worked for an international organization for a number of years myself, and I know I understand what it means to be reporting and making sure you tick all the boxes. But if COVID has taught us anything, it is that we have to be a lot more flexible in the way we approach these matters, so that we should have the flexibility as things emerge to be able to adjust some of these NDCs as we go forward.
Great, thank you so much, Minister Humphrey. I actually have experienced directly that issue of trying to move around wind farm blades when I was on the Galapagos 10 years ago. It's practically impossible to get them to where you need them. And thanks for all of the very strong messages. Our final panelist is Mr. Michael Pintard, who's the Minister of Agriculture and Marine Resources in the Bahamas. Thank you, Minister, for accepting our invitation. I mean, the Bahamas is perhaps the example of resilience and recovery. The country is impacted frequently by hurricanes and storms, and at the same time has tried every time to recover and move forward with sustainable economic development in light of those storms. So what are the main lessons you can take from the previous recovery processes that you could apply to the current crisis, to the COVID crisis? So how does recovering from hurricane damage actually teach you about recovering from the COVID crisis? How can you make that recovery sustainable in the context of the limited fiscal flexibility as well?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and it's good to see colleagues who I've not seen for a while. Let me first begin by making the point that I think all of us agree on. We should not be starting from ground zero after tragedies. We should be looking at countries that have faced similar challenges and adapt the best practices that they have employed. And this is precisely why being a part of the various multinational organizations is extremely important, because you have the benefit of lessons learned from around the globe. And then, of course, there are important regional lessons that we ought to adopt. And so the Bahamas has been plugged into the United Nations system through the FAO. Of course, we're plugged into the important regional organizations such as IECA. And of course, IDB is a consistent partner, and the CARICOM and its research arm, CADI. And so we basically have benefited from input from regional partners who have faced similar challenges. And I think that global and regional cooperation has yielded many lessons that I'm sure we'll itemize as we move on. The second thing is that some of the challenges that we have faced post-Dorian, again, required a regional approach in terms of addressing it, because there are some common problems that all of our jurisdictions face. One of them, for example, is the scarcity in some cases and absence in other cases of insurance for our fisher folk, for our agribusiness persons. And obviously, individual countries have struggled with a remedy to provide insurance, hence a regional approach through CRIF, and of course other mechanisms are very important, because if we're going to have confidence in the level of investment in the sector, persons must know that they are able, on the back end of a climatic event, or in the case of COVID, on the back end of loss of revenue due to shutdown of their businesses, that they're able to recover some income. And so it is the international and regional approaches that have been extremely beneficial. One of the lessons that have come out of all of those best practices is the importance to build smart. Whatever we do now, the policies and practices must reflect where we presently reside. In the Bahamas, we are in Hurricane Alley, so we expect to be struck more times than a number of other countries in the region. And therefore, climate smart technology is extremely important to us, and we're spending a lot more time looking at surveillance mechanisms that can help us have early warning systems, that in the midst of lockdown, we have ensured, for example, that farmers and fishers are still able to go about their regular business. But if a farmer, for example, wish to determine the moisture level in the soil, we know that sensors are important. We know that apps are extremely important in terms of helping us in surveillance and monitoring. of our marine resources. And so one of the things we have noticed looking at other jurisdictions who've gotten this right is that our ability to monitor what is happening in the marine environment and then to quickly respond with the necessary action, that's important. So we have spent a tremendous amount of money in the last budget cycle, for example, on developing an extensive drone system. So the cabinet has improved a tremendous allocation. We've beefed up, for example, the Defense Force, because we understand that while climatic events affect the resources that we have, we also have the issue of poaching, which is a phenomenally difficult problem that requires regional cooperation between governments, but also it requires us having a stronger surveillance system, both in terms of technology as well as in vessels. And that is not just poaching from the south, it's also sports fishers from the north who take liberties with Bahamian resources. And so again, the regional cooperation has been invaluable to us, but we internally have an obligation to use apps so that we are able to stay in contact with each other, to provide timely information on violations, whether by nationals or by others, to use the drone system that is launched from vessels, Defense Force vessels, and over time from fishers' vessels to help monitor the marine environment. As you would be aware, the Bahamas is really a big ocean state, small chain of islands, but 100,000 square miles of water with resources that offer tremendous potential for us. So in terms of lessons, again, best practices has informed us in the past, and that's what we'll be using as we seek to cope with COVID. Regional projects such as the ones funded by IDB, FAO, ECA, all of these types of projects, I think, will put us in good stead going forward.
Thank you so much. Some very important key messages there of not starting from ground zero, learning from other countries. Again, that importance of global and regional cooperation and trying to address common problems together, I think very important. And this question of basically being able to act smart and use real-time information and the question of fisheries management, also key, especially at a regional level. I think Bahamas has been particularly hard hit by COVID. Our own studies actually suggest that you could be facing a 26% decline in GDP, basically as a result of the interruptions in the tourism sector. How do you think that a sort of a blue economy modified tourism sector could help in terms of moving the sector forward and therefore contributing to sustainable recovery?
I'll answer that in two ways. One simply is that even the strategies we have been seeking to implement prior to COVID are still very much relevant. So, for example, the importance of developing an active aquaculture environment is extremely important for the Bahamas, and this is an area that is underutilized. As you would be aware, more than 50% of fish that is consumed is actually grown versus harvested from the oceans. And so in the case of the Bahamas, we're going to go on an aggressive campaign of putting in place robust legislation and policy to govern that sector, but then to move to attract investments, both domestic and internationally, in that sector. And then looking at some of the areas we have only at a cottage industry level focused on, like harvesting and processing of seaweed, for example. Others have come into the Bahamas. We have numerous agencies around the world and universities that study our marine environment. Unfortunately, they have taken advantage of it. And so you have multinational corporations that are benefiting in the area of cosmetics, in the area of medicine, utilizing research that they have conducted in the Bahamas. And so through the access benefit sharing arrangements now and the new approach that we're taking, we want to make sure that we carefully monitor those who come in who were presumably friends, but who were acting narrowly in their own interest to ensure that we benefit from our patrimony. In addition, because one of the greatest challenges we face is competing interests, whether it's competing interests with our neighbors or competing in interests in terms of various in sectors in the Bahamas or industries in the Bahamas, it's going to be very important for us to develop strong synergy between those industries, those ministries that all utilize or benefit from the marine environment. So for example, the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources have carriage of certain dimensions of the oceans that's common to all of us. So does the Ministry of Environment, so does the Ministry of Transport, and so does the Ministry of Tourism. And so over time, political leadership has to rationalize what is the best way to amalgamate ministries so that we don't have a division of political objectives as well as a division of resources that's very difficult, even through intersectorial cooperation, to deploy these resources for a common purpose. And so that's a thing that Caribbean governments, and I see it globally, but really Caribbean governments have to rationalize. But then, of course, there are competing interests regionally that we have to also look at, because we are sharing a common space. And so again, as you refer to opportunities that we can take advantage of in tourism, I'm simply suggesting that some of the approaches we had in mind prior to COVID, we must continue to work on those initiatives. Yes, the world has changed, but many of our objectives remain the same, which is we wish to reduce the amount of Bahamian dollars going out of the country to service those persons who are in the country. So even when we have 7 million tourists, 80 cents of every dollar in the Bahamas was going out to purchase the items that service them. So our approach remains the same, that it's important through import substitution to produce more of what we consume and what our 7 million guests tend to consume. And a part of that is also the marine resources that we're still importing fish in a fish or marine resources rich water. And so as a result, we put in place policies that mandate that 75 cents of every dollar spent by the government on food in the Bahamas must be spent with local producers. And Jamaica has been ahead of us in this. 40% of all dollars spent by private enterprises on food must be sourced from local producers. So what it does is it guarantees market access. And again, it assists us in terms of growing wealth, shifting the employment numbers, because the Bahamas, much like the others in the region, the majority of our population are adversely affected because 65+% of GDP was derived from tourism, which is presently offline and will be offline for the short going to medium term. And therefore, we have an obligation to retrain and retool our population to see the benefits in areas like the blue and green economy, and to make a transition and to recognize that making that transition is in their and our collective interest in doing so. So for example, there's multiple opportunities in tourism in terms of the blue economy, because more persons tend to interact with the marine environment in tourism than actually just consume the food. So imagine a scenario in the Caribbean where we have a robust testing regime, that we are able to ensure that those who wish to still take advantage of this incredible marine environment can come in, and we have a good sense on whether or not they're healthy or not, and they can interact. I mean, many of them need not even come to land. Many persons are coming and staying on their yachts, staying on their boats. And so I think there's a marvelous opportunity to redefine the tourism sector, particularly in the marine environment, where we can continue to earn tourism dollars, but at the same time ensure that both guests and local population remain safe.
Great, thank you so much, Minister. Clearly, I think the blue economy approach is really about opening up that range of options, and I think together everyone has described options that range from aquaculture, the opportunities that could come from looking at seaweed, biotechnologies, and there I do think there is a critical question about access and benefit sharing that needs to be addressed. The other big point that I'm taking up is this question of how do you integrate approaches to governance as well, and how do you make sure that there's not competing interests within the governments over over the management of particular areas. And then actually in a previous discussion we had about, I think last week, we also talked about this issue of connecting in supply chains into the tourism sector as being a critical element as well. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. We have about, I think it's about 7 minutes left. And so I wanted to take some of the questions from the audience. We have one from Cletus directly, which is really comes back to your initial comments about decoupling economic and the economy and the environment a little bit. And so the question is, in essence, is it realistic that economic growth can be actually maintained while maintaining environmental sustainability? Do we not need to think about scaling down? So I'll throw that one for you, Cletus, if you wanted to answer that one.
Absolutely, I think it is possible, and several countries around the world are pioneering work in that regard. The whole idea behind decoupling, of course, is to achieve the same or higher levels of economic growth with less consumption of natural resources. And so it's a question of reducing the per capita consumption, or reducing consumption per capita to achieve a higher level of economic growth. Of course, there's going to be a huge requirement for sustainable lifestyles, changes in our consumption patterns, changes in our production patterns. We have, for example, a circular economy that is coming up, emerging, and is having a significant impact already in certain key sectors. But when I speak of the sustainable lifestyles and the responsibility that bears on each individual to make a contribution to this, I'll give you a practical example. Is it necessary for us to change or upgrade our phones every year? And bearing in mind that this has all kinds of implications with it on the production side, on the consumption side, and so on. So these kinds of little changes, they may appear to be insignificant, but they can make a huge difference in the whole decoupling kind of approach.
Great, thank you, Cletus. Another question that came out of the audience, which is also a critical question, I think we've touched upon as panelists, and is the question of the role for private investment. That how does the private sector get engaged in ensuring a resilient and a blue economy in the long term for the Caribbean? And I think this is particularly critical given fiscal constraints on governments. Clearly the private sector and private investment has got to play a very big role in how we move forward. And that one was open for any of the panelists, if anybody wanted to add to their comments earlier about private investment.
Maybe I could jump in here, Graham, to say that for us here in Jamaica and within the climate space, we consider the private sector as probably our most critical stakeholder, because it is with the private sector that the transformation will take place. Governments will work on the policy conflicts that were mentioned by the minister from Bahamas and so, but the major investments that will come about for this transformation to take place and for this decoupling that we mentioned also in our NDC of decoupling the energy portfolio from the economic growth will take place. It is the private sector, and therefore doing a lot of work now targeting the banking institutions, the financial institutions, looking at environmental and social safeguards, and just translating the knowledge and the conversation for them is critical for us, because without them, no transformation will take place.
In the case of the Bahamas, I think one of the views that are being put forward forcefully now is that there is a need for us to be extremely innovative in what we do going forward. Government has a tremendous amount of land that is available for development, both central government in the Bahamas, in the case of Grand Bahama, an island that has a unique arrangement with a private company owning some 75,000 acres of land. Imagine for a moment putting land in a trust and using the trust as well as viable business profiles to raise capital for onward investment in the agriculture sector. That will eclipse the combined available resources of government and quasi-government agencies that are providing funding now. So there's a need for private sector and government funding. And so governments have to be flexible and loosen the reins in terms of making these kinds of arrangements. Secondly, there are a number of state operated enterprises or state-owned enterprises that, again, we ought to divest ourselves of, in a way that does not disadvantage those farmers, fishers who have become dependent on them because of successive government policies. And in divesting of these state-owned enterprises, to bring the private sector that has a conscience and an interest in the development of the fisheries sector, the agriculture sector, in order to manage them. They tend to do a better job than governments do. And that will catalyze, in our estimation, the sector. And then finally, we need resources that are pumped into micro, small, and medium-sized businesses where the data clearly shows that they can have a return on investment. And in that way, private capital that ordinarily would not look at our sector can feel comfortable taking an equity position or making a loan because they believe there's a reasonable chance of return on investment in these sectors. I think the private sector can catalyze the sector and help us recover post-COVID.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Humphrey, if you wanted to say.
Yeah, just very quickly. So in Barbados, we have a social partnership, and it's government, labor, and of course, the business community. And we just included the NGO sector as well. So the business community is very important to us in anything that we do. I think we have to be conscious so that business people are business people. Most people are not going to just throw their money behind the blue economy because it's now the buzzword, or because they have a conscience, or because it's some altruism. Projects in the blue economy must make sense. I think we have to be clear about how these projects are going to finance themselves. And I think we have to be clear in terms of how we communicate and educate people. For example, Barbados at some point is hoping to manage about 30% of its EEZ. It's certainly going to have very strongly managed about 1 or 2% of our EEZ, those marine managed areas. Would anybody want to help us do that? Maybe not, but they should, because we've seen that from the moment you start managing these spaces well, you start getting back more fish. It then becomes a business proposition because you can get your money back quite easily. You get more coral, you invite more tourists to come, they see the coral, so it's a business thing. It makes sense. We have to frame it as a business. We're also doing the same thing with the port. We want to encourage more people to invest in our port. We want to separate cruise and cargo, but we want to do so in a way that we have a green hub. Does that make sense? Of course it does, because a lot of the new ships are going toward using renewable energy. We'll be ahead of the game. So yes, I think there's a space for business people, but we have to make a business case. And then lastly, a lot of the traditional persons in the sector are treated as if they're in the informal sector. They're not recognized. So we're not asking them to do proper books. And I mean really micro business now. We're not asking them to keep books. We're not asking them to pay taxes. We have to bring people into the system for their own good. And because we say people in the Caribbean are not risk takers. Of course they are. They've been taking risks forever. We just don't recognize these very small people as business people. And I think we have to do these things as well. So there are a number of things that we have to do, but I think the case will not be made if we just try to make a case based on altruism. It has to be a business case for business people.
Okay. I'm afraid we've finally run out of time. I really hope that everyone's just enjoyed this discussion. Normally they say when people still have things to say at the end of a discussion, that's a great thing because that's for the next discussion. And hopefully, based on Cletus's comments at the beginning, that maybe that will lead up to this regional conference on keeping this agenda moving forward, but in a realistic and a pragmatic way that works for the Caribbean. I really want to say before leaving everyone, before saying goodbye, one more thank you to everyone, to basically to Cletus directly for the starting off the discussion at the beginning, to Minister Pintard, Mr. Humphrey, and Una May, the household name in the Climate Change Division. Thank you so much for spending your time. I know you're all super busy and it's been great. It's been a really informative discussion, and I hope it's the first of many discussions we have, and also many actions that we have on the ground. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to everyone for participating in this discussion and listening.
Thank you too.
Thank you, Graham, and congrats again.
Thank you.
Congrats again.
Well done. Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Una May.
Bye, Cletus.